SaaS Therapy.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of SaaS Therapy, the show where we help you save your most important business relationships, your customers. I am your host, Todd Kirk, and I am joined by my co-host, Casey Trujillo, who is the fidgetacular, and he's fidgetacular, I would say that. We're super pumped to have Casey here as always. Casey, you know what that one means?
Well, Todd, I was about ready to say you got to quit watching Bluey with your kids. I think you probably picked up a term like that off of Bluey. Is that right? Or where did you get that term?
I think I made it up. No, I looked it up online. I think it means that you can't sit still, my friend. So,
well, thank you very much.
We are joined today by Chiraag Kapoor, who is a principal at Radian Capital, and we are super pumped to have him here for this discussion today. Chiraag, welcome to SaaS Therapy.
Thanks for having me, guys. Just really excited to talk about all things software.
Agreed. But before we dive in, would you be willing to just give us a little bit of background so folks know who you are?
Yeah, of course. So again, my name is Chiraag. I'm a principal here at Radian Capital. We're a growth equity fund based out of New York, focused primarily investing in vertical B2B software. And I'm a former operator, and we take a strong operating approach to kind of advising and supporting our portfolio companies on all things, software functions. You think from the CEO to people and talent to sales, marketing, and then post-sales. And so my deep focus here with our portfolio companies is all things post-sale. So implementation, onboarding, account management, support, and then also revenue operations. So what's the right tech stack to kind of drive value both internally and externally for our customers?
That's amazing. I think one of the things we're so excited about, so I have some nieces that love to come over to my house, and they discovered this relic. I think it's from like the 1800s, 1900s, called binoculars. So no one's ever seen these things before, and probably our audience members are looking it up. They can't remember this, but right, binoculars, being able to look through them, see things far away, but it seems close, right? The funny part about it is my nieces grabbed the binoculars from the wrong end. And so things looked very far away, not really close. And so, Chiraag, what I love about today's session with you is you're going to give us an investor's perspective, which to some of our audience might seem far away, but really the principles you're going to talk to are things that they should be examining close up. So, Chiraag, as you work with your portfolio companies and you're identifying key areas, there's three key metrics you want everyone to focus on post-sell. Just for our audience, just so we can level set, make sure we're all looking through the right ends of the binoculars. What are those three key metrics that post-sell you're consistently looking at, you're asking the leadership teams that you're working with to look at? What are those three? Define them for the audience. Let's pretend that nobody knows them. Let's go through them just so we have a baseline before we start diving into your top 5 tactical ways to go about this. But if you wouldn't mind just setting that for us.
Yeah, of course. And maybe take another step back, right? Like all of us are in the business of building good product, good software that drives value for our customers. And if we do that, we kind of hit on these key metrics, and those kind of improve if we kind of drive value for customers. And if these metrics do well, then the entire enterprise value of the business goes up, and then we're all successful, right? Investors, company, employees, customers, we're doing right by everyone. And so I think the one thing that a lot of post-sale CS implementation leaders really we get really deep in the weeds, and right, we love kind of making our customers successful, but we forget to tie everything that we're doing back to core metrics. Right. And ultimately we unlike sales, right? You go and you sell software, like that is a direct link to the metrics. Kind of what we do is slightly indirect, but we have to have faith that everything that we're doing kind of drives those core metrics. And we're always able to point back to what we're doing, not just for like executive teams and the board, but also kind of level setting with our individual contributors, right? Reminding them of the why, like, why are we doing something so tactical? How does that impact kind of our business fundamentals, right? And so we think about the core metrics, like number one is retention, right? And retention is super important for every part of the business. We all have a part to play in retaining our customers. And so within retention, you have gross revenue retention, which is basically just the dollars that I started with at the beginning of the period, how much of those did I retain at the end of the period? Kind of typically look at it on a 12-month basis. Then net revenue retention is of the dollars that I started with, how well did I not only retain them, but did I find a way to grow them? Was I able to drive new product, new functionality, more seats, more usage, whatever your business model is, how well did I grow those? And so we as investors, like that's the number one thing we look at is how good is the retention? How sticky is the product? And I think a lot of what we'll talk about tactically, it's like everything that what we're doing is driving towards that renewal point, driving towards our teams to find ways to say, well, how can I add more value to the customer with new features, new modules, whatever it is, right? So that's one. So gross revenue retention and net revenue retention. Then we start really thinking about kind of bookings. And as we said, right, it's really easy for sales, right? You have a new bookings target. Again, bookings are when a customer signs on that dotted line or agrees to saying, yes, I want to buy your software. But from our perspective, post-sale, it's very much about expansion. So if I've driven value of the initial sale to the customer, am I able again to unlock expansion, upsell, cross-sell potential with, again, more stuff, right? That would actually drive value, not just stuff that's just esoteric, right? And again, that expansion component goes into that net revenue retention calculation. They're all kind of intertwined at the end of the day. And then finally, again, all businesses are different. Some have, highly technical implementation, onboarding kind of programs because their software is so complex. And others are just a lot easier to kind of quickly get on board. But ultimately, when I sign a customer, that's the booking. But then when the contract starts and the customer is using the software, that's when I start looking at revenue, or ARR, as a lot of us talk about in the software space. And so I really care about making sure that ARR is live, customers are using the software, it's turned on, it's provisioned, et cetera, et cetera. And so again, all of these are really intertwined metrics, but everything that we're doing is kind of driving towards them. And if you leave with one thing, it's what is the retention? Because retention is built upon both bookings and ARR.
Yeah. Okay. So I love this. And one of the things that's been interesting to me as I've been in the space now for the last few years, talking with different client success teams, some customer success managers or their leadership who are in charge of the customer success team, they are really keyed into these metrics and others aren't. And what I've noticed is that the people who are really keyed into these core business metrics as a team see their team as someone who is responsible for driving revenue, driving expansion, and the ones that aren't are the ones who view themselves essentially as relationship managers or a support team who's just providing training and support. I'm curious, have you noticed that same correlation, and how frequent do you see it of companies that you work with who don't really understand the impact that CS has on these core metrics?
I was just at a conference 2 weeks ago where this topic comes up every single time, right? It's like, how do I show value as a CS leader to my CEO?
Every time.
Right? It is this nonstop. And everyone talks again about metrics. But we're not spending enough time kind of enabling folks on how to talk about the metrics, right? The numbers, the finances kind of scare some people away. And I like to say, if I learned this and I figured it out, so can you, right? And I think we have to enable them, again, not just from an investor perspective or an advisor perspective, but also from the CEO, CFO, we're all speaking the same language and we know the why behind what we're driving towards, right? I think it makes it a little easier, and I think it gives people on the front lines a little bit more confidence and value in what they're doing day in, day out, right? Customer support, right? it is fascinating where that function is headed over time now, especially with AI, right? We're thinking about how does customer support now kind of become, now that I've got an AI chatbot handling so many of these easy tickets, how can support kind of start to become another channel for growth, for
Right.
retention, for expansion opportunities, right? And so if we can speak this language and enable both leaders and individual contributors of what these metrics are, right? Like, I think it just really starts unlocking, and people, you feel more fulfilled in what you're doing day in and day out. And so to your question, Todd, like, I'll see this all the time. And so like whenever I'm have the opportunity to run an enablement session with one of our portfolio companies, we always start with the metrics. We always start with the why. And I want everyone to feel comfortable that everything that we're doing kind of drives those metrics, and that you're not just there to like talk to a customer, like be friendly. That's why like we hire such great CSMs, because they're such empathetic individuals, but always kind of keeping in mind that like we're trying to drive value for the customer. And if we drive value, we will have a positive impact on retention, right? And then when you see that one number just pop up on the screen, you're like, I had an impact on that number, right? Sales gets that again really quickly. Like that feedback loop is like instantaneous. Right. I know it takes a little bit longer, right, from our end on post sale, but like I think just really spending the time to enable folks on the metrics is super important, and it's not happening enough.
Okay, so this is fantastic. What I love about this is the ability for us to get tactical. So we've talked about there's three key metrics: the GRR, NRR, bookings, ARR. Now you've come prepared for our audience, which is awesome. Like again, people join our podcast because they're just kind souls. You're going to give a masterclass here to give some tactical ways in which they can improve in these areas. So you have 5 of these. Let's start with number 1. And it is, and I don't know if this is ranked in order. So you tell me if this is not in order. These are just 5 examples. So one of them, we'll label it 1, is create an amazing customer experience post-sell. So once you've closed the business. Let's expand on that. Tell us what you mean by that, because most people are like, oh yeah, of course we have a great post experience. Walk us through that and what you mean by that.
Yeah, and maybe quickly, Casey, to your point, though, I structure them like along the customer journey. So like one kind of thing we do a lot with our portfolio companies is map the customer journey, right? What is everyone's role? Are we internally aligned to the customer's experience with us, right? From marketing all the way to renewal. And if we as a business internally, the customer only engages with one company, not marketing, not sales, not post sales. It's one entity. And so we have to also structure our operations to match that customer journey. And so kind of to that point, like, I think I've been hearing this a lot, right? Like we have a really tough time from the sales to CS handoff, right? CS goes in and asks the same discovery questions that sales already kind of captured. And so what I mean by this is like the customer is signed. You've convinced them of the value. They're ready to start using the software. And they've fought with their CFO and are ready to spend whatever amount of money, right? Like it doesn't matter if you spend $10,000 or $1 million. It's still like it is money that the company could have used elsewhere. And so once that contract is signed, right, now it's in the hands of post sale, right? It's in the hands of CS. And so what I talk about here is a lot of times is like, is there a beautiful welcome email that goes out to the customer? Is there a really good pre-planned kickoff meeting or presentation that we can share with the customer? A lot of stuff that I think, Casey, you and I have spoken about with Brainstorm really has been like, what is like the enablement plan to get users up and running quickly? And so all of those things, when they're packed beautifully in a nice way, really kind of shows, regardless if our company is a Series A seed stage company or it's a hundreds of millions of dollars of ARR kind of business, we want the customer to feel that they made the right choice, that their hard-earned money is coming to a place that's going to help them drive value and show them that we're a mature, organized business. And so always kicking off with like a lovely welcome email, like on day one, boom, so excited to have you on board, right? This is what we're going to do to make you successful in your first 30, 60, 90 days. These are the people that we have on our side that are thinking about, well, how do we get your users onboarded? How do we maybe set up your technical instance of your platform, right? All these different things, just kind of packaging it up in a really clear way to show that, like, in essence, like, we've got our stuff together.
That's fantastic. I love it. I know Todd has a follow-up question on this, or you might want to go to point 2, but one thing that I saw were really well done from a SaaS organization is you have that handoff. And like you said, let's make sure that we're not asking the same questions and discovery that sales has already done. But one thing I saw on the handoff that I thought, oh, that was genius, is they had a slide and the CSM starts out and says, hey, I know from the sales team, I debriefed with them, and I understand that you're looking to do this. And it's one of 5 value props. We're starting here, but we also want to make sure that you're aware of the other 4 value props that we can offer that come with your contract, but we're going to begin here. And just by saying that, because they have new people that are on the phone, someone goes, hey, could you tell me more about that value prop? And all of a sudden, they're just noting it as the CS person and the implementation person that these are other areas that they might be interested in. So all of a sudden, they're developing out their year plan of what they're going to try to accomplish with this particular customer. But they do just as simple as saying, I know you want to do this, and we just want to put this on there that you know the other value parts that come with your contract. So let's keep going. And they just stop and they go, wait. Help me understand that one. So that's one that I've seen that's just been awesome in creating that amazing customer experience from a customer's point of view. So I love that, Chiraag. Great point.
One of the things you mentioned that I really, really love is, I think a lot of times what I notice with the organizations that I talk to is they think programmatically, but not necessarily with a product lens on. And so what I mean by that is a lot of times what I see is the human comes in and they say, here's all the things we're going to do for you, and here's all the things that we need to go. Oh, by the way, there's a bunch of resources for you. And there's this kind of this battle that I see happening in the market right now between, do I do everything digitally? Would I rather push you to a bot, or would I rather push you through a walkthrough or through training, or would I rather have a human do all of that on the phone? The problem is that either way, what ends up happening is the human becomes tangential and not important, and it's the digital experience first, or the digital experience becomes tangential and it's the human person first. And what I love about what you've mentioned is that if you do it right, you can provide the customer with an awesome experience that feels buttoned up and intentional, not like, I've made all these resources for you, or you can hop on all these calls with me. And that's generally, that's as far as most people take it, is here's a bunch of resources and here's a bunch of calls, but it doesn't feel like it's leading to something, and it's unclear and it's messy and it feels like overwhelming to the customer because it's not packaged up as if it's like, we do this whole process of onboarding you is part of who we are and part of the product that you're buying, if that makes sense.
No, and it's spot on. I think this, first of all, Casey, I'm gonna take that example that you just gave and kind of repurpose. I love that, right? Like, we'll talk about it towards the end, right? Like, that just drives potential expansion opportunities in the future, right? Like, that's just amazing. And so if we kind of go to the second point, which is like driving down that time to value, right? And so if we start thinking about it, contract signed, now I have like that welcome email, kickoff presentation. Let's figure out kind of how we build a good plan, over time of how we're going to drive success and value. Now it's about starting to drive that value, right? And so that's where onboarding and implementation really kind of come in. And the one thing that, again, this is anecdotal, but like just my own experience is like, you can kind of tell if a customer is going to churn or not within the first 90 days,
Amen.
Right? Like, how bought in are they?
Yeah.
Like, I hear this all the time. It's like, I ask a lot of companies, like, how long does your implementation take? And they're like, oh, well, it's dependent on the customer. Oh, well, I was super stoked and really excited about it. Like, I would want it on tomorrow.
Right.
And so you start thinking about that time to value. And so what does that mean? And so like the first part, right, it's like, do I have the users provisioned and the platform provisioned instantaneously, right? Like that's where like the product linkage really comes in, right? Like am I auto provisioning everyone and the system sending them like, hey, like here's your user login and everything. All the big guys do this, right? Like really well. And I know it's a little maybe challenging on the product side. I'm not a product expert, but like how can we find a way to do that even on a smaller scale, right? And then when we start talking about onboarding, right, it's really about, well, what does value mean? What does a completed implementation, what does a completed onboarding mean? And that's another question that I typically ask is like, let's define it. Like, what do you believe the user should be doing, right? What actions should they be taking for you to say, cool, we're done, right? Like our onboarding stuff, now it's handed to the CSM. They're going to manage like the business reviews, et cetera, et cetera. Like, but like, what does value mean? And so in the first 90 days, let's say like that's like a typical kind of thing, right? Is like the user has taken all these actions. They've been able to create a document and save it and export it to PDF, whatever your platform does. Like really getting tight on that, because like what happens, and we'll get to a later point, like you start seeing a lot of efficiency drag, but then too, like the customer's like, well, what did I just buy? Like, is this really a part of my daily workflow? Is it not? Like, so we really talk about how am I driving down the time to value in onboarding and implementation phase by defining what it means to have value. What actions are the users actually taking?
Any best practices or things that you've seen? Because I've seen SaaS vendors go too complex to say they're officially onboarded, and they're just like, why do they have to do that many things in your system to consider it onboarding? And they stall out. And then I've seen other SaaS vendors take the opposite approach, where it's just they just do this one thing and then boom, we're turning it over to CS, and CS is like, they're not fully onboarded all the way. Any best practices on how you find that Goldilocks zone? Anything you've seen? Any tips or advice you could give to the audience on that?
That's a really good question. And I think that's a little bit of a holy grail. Like every business is different, right? And I think we really get to this point, like we spoke about the core metrics, right? But like there is some level over time, you know, where I expect CS leaders to come back and say, okay, let's do some correlation analysis, right?
Like that.
And like, give me like, I don't know, like, give me your 5 metrics that you think are user metrics that you think are super important. And let's go run a correlation analysis of retention versus that, or implementation or onboarding time, like lengths that it took, right? Like ultimately, I think it's a little bit of an experimentation game, right? Handing the customer off a little too early, to your point, then like makes CS's job a lot harder, right? We got a lot more efficiency drag. And if we take it too long, right? Like think about it. Like if I've signed a 12-month contract and onboarding's taken me 6 months, I actually only have 6 months for them to really have adopted the platform and like driven more value for their business, right? And so it's a little bit of an experimentation game, but like think about like what is humanly possible to do in the first 100 days, right? And then if it's like my really complex product, how can I speed that up? Maybe with some additional professional services, some pre-built templates or whatever it is, right? So that I can drive value, right? There are like companies out there, I just think about like Monday.com. You know, they've got pre-built templates that I just go and I'll use so that I can start seeing value sooner. I can hopefully come out of an onboarding phase a lot sooner.
You know, I one of the things that I think sticks out to me there, Chiraag, is the fact that the way that we would generally define value at the user level is actions that they take in the product. There are core actions or behaviors that the user needs to do in the product in order to unlock the value. So using your Monday.com example, if I'm tracking to see how many users have created a project using a template, then that's maybe a really good signal that they're starting to unlock the value. The part where I think a lot of organizations struggle, depending on the type of software that they have, is trying to tie it back to an actual core business outcome that the company cares about. So like an example might be Zoom. So let's say the way I know a user is getting value out of Zoom is if they're holding a lot of meetings. But how do I tie that back into a business objective that a decision maker cares about? Are we saying having a lot of Zoom meetings means less travel? It means a faster closing cycle if we're in consulting, and we have more time on the phone is more billable hours that we can charge the customer for. Like a lot of times there's that disconnect. And for you, when you think about time to value and driving it down, do you the holy grail is ultimately being able to showcase to the customer, this software made you money or saved you money, or it took away some major risk that you had. But that can feel difficult to tie the software to directly, because the only thing we usually can see is the user did a thing in our application. And so for you, when you're saying drive down value, how important do you think it is to get to that next level of being able to help the customer tie it to an actual business outcome and result?
I think that's a really good point. And so like maybe try to rephrase a little bit of what we've just discussed, right? Is when I'm selling, I've got these value levers, right? Like to your point, I'm going to help top line growth, or I'm going to have drive efficiency gains and like cost reduction, right? Like in some form, a lot of software is just trying to hit on one of those two major buckets, right? How do I show that by the time the customer's up for renewal, right? And that's a lot of what like the CSM is trying to communicate, right? During post-implementation, post-onboarding. And so to your point, I think what you're saying, and I totally agree with, is what are the actions, the activities within the platform that ladder up into driving that value? And so when I say in onboarding, when I'm saying drive down time to value, I think, Todd, this is spot on. Maybe a little bit of a rephrasing is, what are the actions that I know, if done repeatedly, should deliver that business outcome for the business, right? Like, and so ultimately, an onboarding, I want to know that the customer can and is enabled to do those actions that I think are mission critical to driving the value that they signed up for during the sales cycle, right? And so I'm driving down the time to value because I now know that the user can take the actions on their own, that I know if I do them and I layer them on and I do them repeatedly, they should create that business outcome that we kind of sold them.
It's awesome. Okay. Tip number 1, create an amazing customer experience post-sell. 2, drive down the time to value. We're now to 3, onboarding throughput. Describe that. What do you mean by that? And why is that the next step?
So we're just seeing this quite a bit, right? And Todd kind of hit on this, right? There is a combination of tech touch and human touch, especially on the onboarding front, or the post-close onboarding kind of area. And so a lot of times when you're at a smaller scale, I've got a lot of demand, right? At the top of the funnel. Can my team post-close ensure that everyone kind of goes through that onboarding flow, hits those key activities so that I can eventually drive down the time to value, right? Like, do I have enough bandwidth? Do I have enough capacity to do that? And so what we really talk about is, well, how many implementations and onboardings can our team complete within a given period of time? Can we start shaving the time that it takes to be onboarded, right, down, right? And so really starting to get deeper and deeper into, well, what is our team doing, both from a technology perspective and a human perspective, right, to kind of get more onboardings complete off of the onboarding team's plate and onto the CSM, right? And so really constantly thinking about what's the velocity there and how are we finding efficiencies kind of over time.
So, essentially throughput is, I guess you could have one of two problems, which is, one, you have a lot of deals that are coming in and they're not ever getting fully implemented, or you have a few deals coming in and it's taking you way too long to get them implemented. And so I guess the thing that I think is really interesting to think through here is what have you seen that has been that's been effective in ensuring that you get more people through that process, and how do you balance the tech touch versus the human touch and all of that kind of stuff?
Yeah, and I think it goes a little bit. So a lot of these things are overlapping, right? And so when we spoke about the driving down the time to value, it's like getting tight on like what are those key activities I want users doing, right? How do I get them what they need when they need it, and like really focusing on those core elements, right? Those core activities. The second, and again, is every product is different, but if you have like you have a technical implementation side of the house, integration, setup, etc., and then we have user enablement. And a lot of times we kind of mash those two together, right? It's like, oh, I've set up your system, but we're still waiting for the users to be fully enabled, right? Like they're two distinct things. And so how do I now again define what a completed onboarding and implementation is? How do I just narrow down on the key activities I want them to be able to take, right? And then starting to view the entire playbook in more granular pieces, right? So we try. So the first one is to always try to break apart and analyze the technical side of it, and then the user enablement side of it as two separate things.
Yeah, okay, that makes a lot of sense to me, because I think the funny part is, and a lot of times there's a disconnect that a lot of the vendors that I see have, where they're able to do maybe the technical setup really well. They're able to get a technical person on the call to set up SSO, or get the application installed, or things like that. But when it comes to actually distributing it out to the end user and making sure the user knows how to use it, there's something that tends to break down. And I think maybe that leads to your fourth point, because I see that's where a lot of people get stuck on that throughput story is I can get you implemented, but actually getting the users to adopt it and to make sure that they keep going, that's not always the easiest thing in the world.
No, and I think that's so the fourth point being like, how do I continue to drive and maintain user adoption? So once I know that they can do the core activities I want them to do, how do I keep pushing them, right, to feel comfortable? How do I make it a part of their workflow, right? And so, again, I think Casey, I've spoken about this a lot, right? It's like the really cool thing about like new technologies like Brainstorm is like really meeting the customer where they are, meeting the user for what their use case is and what role that they're playing, right? And really thinking about, like, again, like that whole customer journey map, like what activities do I want users doing at what point? And so like, I might have 10 of them, but I only kind of want them to do, if I can get them to do the core 5, I feel good. And then the CSMs, they're constantly monitoring how things are going, and like, how through a technology perspective, how through a human-led interaction can I be like, oh, hey guys, like, have you started using now this part of the platform, right? And
yes, so true. And you know what? I will say this when I'm doing some consulting with SaaS companies is you're a SaaS organization, but your end user adoption is if they're on-prem. And what I mean by that is they usually always think about their customer in this moment of time when we first sell the deal. So we sell professional services, we do a bunch of instructor-led training, we onboard them, we get them trained up, we do 4 days of virtual or in-person training sessions, and boom, okay, they're off and running and they're done. Yep, on-prem, well, they're good. Wait, your software changes, they hire new employees, your point of contact maybe change, they might have acquired another company and now they want them to use your software. It's like, you got to treat user adoption as an ongoing process, not a one-time event. So the one that I find the most where SaaS organizations break down is they treat user adoption as in the first 90 days. Did we sell our professional services? Good, check mark it, done. And then we do this, Chiraag, we have this ongoing survey that we post to CSMs, and we ask them 10 questions. And one of the questions is, how much time do you spend in training? Like, how much time are you doing product training with your customers? And it's usually, without fail, it still has stayed about 70% of their time they're doing product training. And then a CSM has usually, on average, more than 100 customers. So how are you
helping 100 customers do all this product training, and you're spending most of your time as a CS person doing product training. Like, people didn't hire you to be a trainer. And that's, I think, where people are missing out on that entire customer experience is, okay, the first 90 days, we're selling this, we're selling that, we're doing a great job, but then what? Then what's our plan? Then how are we going to execute on it? And I think that's where a lot of people fell in regards to that. And I don't know, Chiraag, if you've seen the same as you worked with organizations. I think one of the portfolio companies you had that you guys first started with was like a Miro before they went huge. Like, people that get it and they go big, right? But how do you advise people on this with user adoption? How do you make sure that it's a consistent focus and not just a one-time thing at the beginning?
It all goes back to like constantly tracking your customers and those core activities and product, again, activities that they're doing. Like, I think the biggest thing is that we as CSMs end up becoming super reactive. A customer saying, hey, like, I really need help on, like, or help me with this, or like, can you run a training here? Or like, we're 90 days out from a renewal and like the account manager saying, I think we're in trouble here, right? Like, go and fix that. And so it all stems from like, if we can get help from product to really give us nice, clean, simple dashboards. So we're constantly tracking all that, and we start to see like certain things aren't happening the way we want them to, right? They're starting to dip, right? How can I then reach out and be like, hey, we're noticing this, like, what's going on? Here are all the resources we have. The last resort really should be for a human to get on a plane and go see them in person, or hop on a Zoom call with 40 other people, right? Like, it should really be like, what can I get you? Sometimes it's just like a nice reminder is all they need. Or like, when I have a business review, like, we can have probably another 2-hour long podcast on QBRs, right? Like, it's, what are we communicating to the executive stakeholders during these business reviews, right? And a part of it's like, what value are we driving for them? And if value isn't there, why isn't it going there? And it's probably always linked to the fact that people aren't using the software the way they should be, right? And kind of reminding the stakeholders like, hey, we have all these tools, all this content, all these ways to help your users really get the most out of the product. So how can I be proactive? How can I communicate it to executive stakeholders rather than just kind of waiting for them to come to me and be like, hey, I need help?
Yeah, it's such a good point. And I think the when done well, it opens up so many opportunities for you to be able to grow the account. And you can't grow the account if nobody's using it. You're at a massive risk of churn if people don't ever adopt it, right?
We're in the business of selling software and having people use our software.
Yep. So when it comes down to, obviously we've talked about 4 of the 5 tactical things, right? 1, we need an amazing customer experience after the deal's closed. We need to drive down time to value. We need to drive throughput for the onboarding experience, both for not just the technical configuration, but the end users, and ensure that we maintain that adoption. So we can ultimately, your last one is expand, right? Drive expansion and retention. So from your perspective, how would you say, what would you say is ways that we can use continuous education to help drive adoption and help people really purchase more and grow and want to see more value out of their relationship in the long term?
Yeah. And so I kind of put this last one in there because, again, I wanted to always, again, tie all the tactical things that we're doing, the first 4 that we spoke about, that like all of our teams are probably doing day in and day out, because it leads to expansion and retention. Right. And again, I wanted to find, like, it takes a little bit of time, right? But we get to all the things we do get us to that end state, those core metrics that drive enterprise value for our business, right? And again, if we do all these things, the customer's super happy, they have a great experience, they've adopted the system. How do we then kind of use continuous education to start thinking about kind of, again, first, it's much easier to talk about it from the retention perspective, right? Like, again, if we just spoke about, like, as we continually enable or re-enable users, right, on those core activities, those core things they're doing in the platform, that should, in theory, we're in business. The reason we're in business is because if we do those things, you'll get the value, you'll get the business outcomes, you'll get the renewal. Expansion becomes really interesting here, though, right? Is I start kind of picking up on triggers, right? When customers do X, Y, and Z, right? They might be prime candidates for wanting to use this other part of my platform. Or we start enabling a team on, how, like mural, like on how to build a beautiful mural board. We use those sessions as also ways of saying, hey, share this with other teams. They might find this interesting.
Yeah.
Right? Like bring in some other folks. Maybe they might want to just hear kind of how you guys are using the software and what value you're getting out of it. Right?
Yes.
That's like another way, like that's like a typical seat expansion kind of motion there.
Yes. Yeah, and I think for me, one of the things that I advise CS people on this, because they're usually primarily responsible for renewals, and then they kind of shy away from expansions. They don't know how to handle it. I would actually make it mandatory. If Casey was ruling the world here in the SaaS industry, I would make my CS people go through a course every year on how to ask open-ended questions. We hire CS people. They're really great at relationships, but they get so scared. Like, I don't want to be a salesperson. My whole role is just to provide value. And you're like, oh man, you are missing. Like I talked about with that one CS leader that they saw that they put the 5 different value props and said, I know we want to start here, but I want to make sure you know that this comes included. Is there anything else I should be right? When you're using a QBR and something's standing out and you're like, hey, I'm curious, is there any other part of your business that could be utilizing this? That's it. That easy of a question. And they either say yes or no. And then if they say yes, you're like, oh, who is that? And why do you think that? And all of a sudden, now I've identified an expansion opportunity that I can pass over. It should be mandatory. CS people go through how to ask great open-ended questions, because it's not as hard as what they're thinking. It really isn't. It's a natural and normal way to do it if they understand the principles of how to ask those type of questions. So, sorry, my little rant. I got off on it. Sorry, Todd. Chiraag, I don't know what your take is on that. And you can totally disagree. I'm on a strong side on this one of like CS people are untapped potential. We're just not training them right on that one.
I think that's bingo right there, right? Like there's so much empathy. They care about the customer. Yeah. They understand the product. They understand the vertical. Like the way we start to get people into that motion, right? Like a different way of putting it is like, I like to ask a lot of like, oh, hey, why are you guys asking for more training or more resources on how to do X, Y, and Z? Like, what are you trying to drive towards? Like, sometimes they don't just tell you right to your face, especially during discovery, etc. And so, like, that might just pop up of an idea of like, oh, well, actually, you might need this module or this feature, right? And the way we I personally like to get CSMs a little bit more commercially focused is like, I don't want you to be a salesperson. I didn't hire you to be a salesperson. What I did hire you to do was to identify ways that our platform can continue to drive value to our customers. And if that means that they need more seats or they need this feature, they need this integration, identify it, right? And then simply pass it back over the fence to sales. Hey, customer, just wanted to let you know that like, I think this new feature is going to be great for you guys. Like, and then you played the good cop, you've communicated the value, you have buy-in, and you haven't said a word about how much it costs, getting them a contract, and be like, hey, I know you don't really want to do this, but like, I'm going to have you talk to my sales guy, Casey, over here, right? And like, like he's going to help you just get it provisioned and get it online. But like, I really think this is going to take you guys to the next level.
I love it. So we've talked a bunch today about some really great tactical areas that you can focus on to really improve. And one of the things that has crossed my mind, and I'd just be curious to get your take on this real quick as we start to wrap up here. Depending on your level of maturity as a company, this might feel really overwhelming. So like, if you're a brand new startup, all of this you might be one person trying to figure all of this out on your own. You might be a mid-sized company who has a lot of resources dedicated to this, but now that you've dedicated all those resources, now everything becomes segmented and siloed and the experience starts to suffer. And then you get a little bit bigger and you're like, okay, well now we're just going to have somebody who's dedicated 100% to customer experience, and they're going to figure out how to take all these different siloed teams, and they're going to make a better experience because now we have lots of these different parties who are working on it. I guess because I would guess we have a mix of people on the call who are they fall into one of those three buckets, right? Any words of hope you can give to people who feel like they're floundering in one of those stages and can't figure out how to move from one to the other, or can't see the light at the end of the tunnel?
100%. Like I think about this a lot, and sometimes I get myself in trouble because like I think about all these things, right? Because I know how interconnected they are, and it can feel overwhelming. If you start thinking about this early enough, there is no need to have to do everything perfectly on day one. Start small, right? And bit by bit, like this month, I'm going to make sure that the team has a phenomenal welcome deck, a phenomenal kickoff deck, a great, like, simple standard operating procedure of what to do once the deal gets signed and marked closed won in Salesforce. That's all we're going to do today, right? And we're going to get the team doing it. When I feel they feel good, I'm going to move on to the next thing, right? I think a lot of times these conversations only spring up when retention starts taking a hit. That's it. Like, once retention starts taking a hit, like, it is really hard to dig yourself out of a hole. Not saying it can't be done. Like, it can be done. It just requires a lot of like SWAT team, like everyone kind of like powering through it together, like hand-to-hand combat, as I like to say sometimes. Like, but like, start thinking about it early, and then just start going at it bit by bit, because the last thing you want to do is have to try to say, I need to fix my customer experience, my onboarding process, my driving down time to value, when you see retention coming down. I'm like, don't forget, like, retention is a lagging indicator.
Oh, so good. Well, I don't know if people are feeling inspired. I hope they are, to think, man, I can make some baby steps. I can make some baby steps, and we'll figure this all out. Chiraag, we always ask people who come on the show one final question before we close. And because this is SaaS therapy, right? Every good therapy session ends with homework, some action item you're going to do moving forward. So if you could give one piece of advice, one action item you'd ask our audience to do today, what would your homework assignment be?
I would ask everyone to speak to their onboarding, implementation, CSM teams and ask them, like, what activities and actions in the platform do you think are the foundational elements that drive value for the customer? Like, can we document those? Do people know it? Like, my assumption I've just learned is everyone has their own. Like, if you ask 5 people in a company, you get 5 different answers. Like, what are we all driving towards in the first 90 days?
Oh, so good. Chiraag, thank you. You've been an awesome guest.
Thank you.
And
It's awesome.
thank you for coming today. We can't wait to talk to you again. SaaS Therapy is brought to you by Brainstorm, the SaaS platform for SaaS adoption. Learn more at brainstorminc.com.